at ya. At ya. Tell you what's master. Coming at ya. Coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster. Coming at ya. At ya. Tell you what's master.
Welcome to another episode of Cut the Bull. I am Wilfred Reilly, as always, one of your co-hosts. I'm here with Brooks Crenshaw, Charles Love, some other beautiful men.
Anybody got time for that?
Oh, in fact, we got four. Yeah, nobody got time for that. Christy Kelly apparently has a case of bronchitis. Send thoughts and prayers to her. She's trying to get better. Famous video about this. But we are here today with AP4Liberty, as you may know him from X and other portals, Austin Peterson. We're going to be talking about a whole range of issues on Cut the Bull. Austin, welcome to the show. We're very glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, fellas. Good to be here.
Yeah. You invited me on your platform, your podcast, pretty recently. We had a good conversation, I think. So glad to see the cycle come full. And I usually open with kind of one question that's general background, and then we all drill down a little bit. In your case, the question's not really a softball so much as a backgrounder. So you ran for president, as I understand, going a little bit into the detail. Yeah, 2016, you ran.
This was the 2016, the Gary Johnson year, the year that Gary Johnson took it. It was me, Gary Johnson, and John McAfee all competed, and I just edged out John McAfee for second place. But I think that was kind of like the high watermark year of the Libertarian Party, and I would say the Libertarian movement in the United States. And then it was kind of all downhill after that. So, but I still believe in liberty, and I still believe in the principles that, you know, I got into the political sphere to champion. I believe in individual liberty, and I think I probably have changed my views on certain things. Perhaps I'm not like what you might consider a typical American libertarian when it comes to things like foreign policy or certain issues. But I really think that now that I sort of have distinguished myself as different from a lot of American libertarians on the foreign policy issue, it's actually, I feel like I'm a little bit ahead of the curve right now, because in my opinion, I think a lot of the moral bankruptcy and sort of like the dark underbelly of the right has started to show. And I've been able to, having been in the liberty movement for like 17 years, sort of point out where some of the rot, the ideological and intellectual rot, has been coming from. And sadly, it's, I think, from a lot of libertarians. But there are some bright spots. For some reason, the president of Argentina, this Javier Milei guy, has taken a real liking to me. I don't know if they put me on some kind of friends list or something. The guy like reposts me every day, so I'm thinking about like charging him now for reposting me. But there's some bright spots, there's some dark spots, and you know, I'm confrontational, and so I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I'm not socially conservative, so I probably don't fit in with a lot of typical mainstream Republicans right now, who like the only thing that they're really conservative about anymore is just the social issues. So, but I love that you're always talking about sex on X, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty much the only guy who's like sort of vaguely right wing who will actually talk about the thing that I think is the biggest problem on the right, which is that young people are not having sex. And I'm looking forward to talking about that tonight, because I actually think it's one of the main causes of the woes and the problems that we're facing on the right is the lack of libido. But we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later.
Yeah, so you just, as a pro in the broadcast game yourself, I mean, you dug into about 10 topics there: decline testosterone among men, problems in couple formation, your own campaign, what it means to be libertarian in practice. Is there a libertarian foreign policy, domestic policy? I think the question that I would go to first, and then we're probably going to move to Brooks, who has some liberty movement tendencies himself, I think. But when you talk about you're not a typical libertarian when it comes to overseas issues, what would libertarian policy actually look like in terms of governing a country like the United States? And I don't mean that as a vague, glib question, but I mean, if the libertarians ever did get to 30% of the vote, the presidential, if libertarian governors were picking up states, what would a liberty policy be when it comes to taxes, policing? How would that work in practice?
It would depend on which libertarian you ask. You know, to be intellectually honest, there are around 10 different major schools of thought within libertarianism, right? So you've got your Ayn Rand people who are like objectivists. You've got anarcho-capitalists who are like the Rothbardians and stuff. So, if I were to say, let's say a minarchist or like a constitutional libertarian, a very limited government libertarian, what would it look like domestically? Right? It would probably look like something between a Reagan Bush with like a little bit more emphasis on gun rights. You wouldn't see red flag laws, right? You would probably see more constitutional backstops to certain liberties. There'd be more danger involved in certain ways because there would be more laissez-faire. People would be more apt, they'd be capable of doing what we have happened here in Missouri. You can carry guns in our state capitol here in Missouri. You go through a metal detector, you show them your gun, and then you walk right in, and you could literally walk into the governor's office carrying a piece here in Missouri. So it would probably look like that in more states. I think that there would probably be a transition period that would be painful. There would be a period where for like 3 to 4 to 5 to maybe even 7 to 10 years where there's going to be a lot of turbulence because it's like people who are addicted to alcohol or drugs, they're going to feel that pain when you start taking away, like you can see right now, the SNAP benefits. There's been a lot of threats about what's going to happen if the SNAP benefits are not renewed, although we haven't seen kind of that follow through. But you'd actually see some of the things that you're seeing right now in a lot of communities. I don't know if you guys have been following the headlines on the shutdown with the SNAP story, but a lot of these churches, a lot of these community groups have started stepping up and making announcements. I've seen people on my Facebook page that were friends from high school who are saying anybody whose SNAP benefits are reduced and needs help, no questions asked, reach out to me, we'll buy them food. So you'd start to see that a lot more. You'd start to see like GoFundMe's for certain things that the government takes care of, and people would judge it based on merit. It wouldn't always come up with the best possible outcome because God knows we do have unlimited freedom in certain things, and it does lead to consequences that, the gentlemen who are here might be like, well, I don't like that consequence of freedom. Freedom is dangerous. It does have negative consequences, not always going to be the best case outcome, perhaps for everyone. It just so happens that it's the best case scenario out of all of the other possible case scenarios that we face with, because we live in a time now, I think, where we are really spoiled. We are so spoiled that we don't know how good that we really have it. And even in the time period that we have lived, we've gone from 20 pages driving on the road with MapQuest in front of our face, shuffling through pages, now to someone talking to us, telling us how to get from one place to another. I was watching taxi cabs. They had to do a test in London, and in order to get a taxi cab license, they would ask you all of these specific streets all over the city. They used to have it all memorized in order to be able to drive a taxi, and now you have Uber, and nobody knows how to get anywhere because our computers tell us how to do it. But that's because of, to some extent, a laissez-faire approach when it comes to the regulation of tech over the years. And now we're having conversations about whether we need to regulate AI. So I think we'd be further along in certain ways. I think that, when it comes to technology, I think when it comes to health and medical innovation, we'd definitely be farther down the path, because I think that medical licensing, I think that restrictions on the ability to open up. You can't even open up. If you own a hospital, you have to ask permission from the city council in order to get another bed. If you want to put another bed in your hospital, you have to have a certificate of need. You have to show that you need to put another bed in your hospital. I mean, can you imagine if hospitals were allowed to decide how many beds they were allowed to build in there? Like, you would see hospitals that could actually service their communities in an appropriate way. So you'd see innovation in other ways. And in some ways, there might be outcomes that some people might not like. So on a broader base perspective, you'd see a lot more experimentation and a lot less asking for permission. And so, we're a permission society. We're a licensed society. It requires a lot of licenses to do a lot of different things. I saw a beautiful new aircraft. It's a super light aircraft. It's essentially a drone. You need 2 weeks of training to fly the thing, and it can only go about 20 miles, but it lacks a lot of safety features, because as soon as they start adding those safety features, it becomes heavier, which makes it more regular by the FAA. So we don't have flying cars with fog lights, because you just you can't create an aircraft for people to be able to fly around in and meet all the standards and rules and regulations. So, I'm not saying it would be a utopia, there'd be flying cars everywhere, but I'm saying it would probably be not a utopia, but there would be flying cars everywhere. So you'd be seeing a lot more experimentation, and there'd be crashes and there would be danger.
Yeah. That Z-axis is a bitch.
To break in there briefly, one thing you said that's actually genuinely interesting. We don't have flying cars because the FAA regulates anything over a certain complexity and weight as an aircraft. I hadn't actually thought about that beyond just briefly in passing for years, but that actually is true. Like, it would be almost impossible to develop the tech. But I mean, Brooks, I think I'm going to move to you for the next question. Obviously, you've discussed liberty a lot on the panel. I would actually open with a question to you before your question to Austin. In a libertarian society, would you keep, say, Social Security, Brooks? What do you think? Would those major government programs keep existing, or is it just free capitalist competition across the board? And then what do you have for the guest?
Well, so this is the pernicious nature of it, right? Because the second that you incorporate the new regulation, you also build in the cost of removing it, right? It's like whether you're talking about drug policy let's talk about drug policy for a second. If you infantilize your population, built into the regulation of you're not adult enough to deal with this substance, built into that is the fact that if you remove that regulation, you're going to have a population that goes through its teenage phase, and you're going to have those lessons of Uncle Ricky. I can't mess with Coke because of what happened to Uncle Ricky, and now I've got just nature as a lesson instead of mother government looking over my shoulder for my own good. That's certainly a big part of it. I mean, I've identified libertarian. I'm probably with you, Austin, with regard to, as a former military guy, foreign policy is kind of where I often differ. The other issue is borders. You got closed borders and open border libertarians, but Milton Friedman, you can have open borders, so you can have a welfare state. You can't have both, and that's pretty reasonable. What would it look like? I tend to think that if most of federal regulation were to go away tomorrow, the states would adapt and the counties would, it would be pushed down into smaller and smaller experiments. And that's a good thing because you're isolating misery and you've got a lot of experiments playing out, which is what I want to see. And it's not that one state's going to get it right and it will make sense for all other states, because all other states have different features, different populations, different demography, different geography, different industry clusters. So what works for one state regulatorily might not work for another. And that's the whole point. I want to see it pushed downward. And the big rub there is, why do I send 30% of my money to DC and like 6% to my state when all my problems are at the county level, maybe the state level? And then the counties and the states beg the federal government, as long as they're acting right and move the legal limit to 0.08 instead of 0.1, I can get my highway money, right? That's an inversion. That's a key part of the structural problem. And I don't know how to get away from that, whether, the rumor of abolishing the IRS is certainly delicious, but I don't see anything that makes that other than a rumor. In terms of questions for Austin, really, I mean, in the wake of Mamdani, what do you think? What do you think New York is in for, and what does that mean for 2026?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's unfortunate the way that these elections rolled out, because I think that it confirms the left gets to confirm all of their biases with this election. Whether you're a moderate left or whether you're hard left, communist Mamdani, everybody had something to take away on the left for a victory. You had your Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, and you had who was the guy who threatened murdering his opponent? Was that in Maryland? That Jay Jones guy?
Jay Jones.
Virginia.
Jay Jones, yeah. Virginia. So every leftist got something that they wanted, and they know that they can now threaten to murder us with impunity, and can murder us with impunity and face no electoral consequences for that. You would think coming off of the heels of the murder of Charlie Kirk, that just like the attempted assassination of Donald Trump went, that people would be more willing to listen to conservative ideals or candidates. But you know what the truth is? The truth is that people only care about the economy, and they only blame the people who are in charge at the moment. And you see this pendulum going back and forth. It's just the natural swing of time because people have short memories. There actually, I saw an interesting article that proposed that it's possible that humans now actually have shorter attention spans than goldfish. It used to be that we had the attention spans of goldfish, but now it's actually less. And so I think we're probably going to go through some dark times, but the American people are resilient. We are still the descendants of very powerful, our ancestors in this country and the people who built this country, and even the immigrants who moved here in recent generations, 2 or 3 generations past, to make it to the United States. Very, very, very strong, hardy folk. If you've made it to the United States or you've made it in the United States, you're probably made of pretty strong stock. So I think that there are bright spots, and there are optimistic things that you can look at. One of the big things that you guys might look at if you're looking for a silver lining in some clouds, depending on how you feel about this issue, but the Supreme Court might be ready to overturn majority minority districts, which, that law is a big reason why Republicans have been held back from what I believe is the proper dominance of the Republican Party of the electoral map. And if that is overturned, it's possible that Republicans could add as many as 9 to 15 seats. And then you're really talking about, you're not talking about a supermajority, we have that here in Missouri on the statewide level, a Republican supermajority. And it kind of hurts you because then you just get liberals and leftists running as Republicans. But if you had a strong majority, not a supermajority of Republicans, you might actually see them having more backbone to make proposals that would be more in line with our values. They could be a little bolder, but that could really change the electoral map. So when you see after the election of 2024 last year, when you see the ocean of red with little tiny spots of blue, that's still the same map for the most part as it is after that election. Democrats mostly won in Democrat states. They did win some Republican districts in places like Pennsylvania, but they didn't flip any swing states, and they didn't flip any Republican states whatsoever. So there are some silver linings to this, and there are some things on the horizon that you can point at and look and say, hey, listen, Republicans still control the vast majority of the landmass of the continental United States. And the problem, of course, is that most people in this country are one-shotted by the mainstream media. If you're not watching shows like this, if you don't watch podcasts, if you're watching ABC News all day, like I have family members that I know, they'll come over and and you can tell they've been watching the mainstream media all day because they have all the anti-Trump stuff that's bullshit. They have all of the talking points, about the shutdown and things like that. And it's like the media is sort of like a laser cannon brainwashing it still exists and it's still doing its job. So what it does is it crafts the perception of dominance, right there. If you read the headlines from the last 2 days after this election, if you read CBS, not CBS, now they got Barry Weiss, they've been getting better. But if you read ABC News or you read the AP or Reuters, then you would think the Democrats are surging back. They're on the upswing. Yeah. Well, the thing is that if you hear that, then as a Democrat, you're gonna believe it, and if you believe it, then you're gonna act accordingly, right? So the demoralization that's going on right now, it's the most. I've been in politics 17 years, and I have seen demoralization campaigns, but I have never seen demoralization campaigns being aimed at the right as strongly as they have been in the last few years. It is constant negativity and demoralization going on. And it's even stronger on social media. We're just thankful that we actually have some shows and we have some platforms 10 years ago, we didn't have Rumble. 10 years ago, we didn't have some of these alternative platforms. If you started a conservative social network like Parler, Amazon would kick you off. You would get destroyed. You would have millions of dollars invested lost. So we're building a parallel economy right now. There are institutions that we control that that can help us to become cancel proof. But right now, it's shocking just how much demoralization there is going on. Every time you open it up, Candace Owens has got a new conspiracy theory about who shot Charlie Kirk, except for the leftist who shot him, right? Every time you open up your thing, it's dead babies in Gaza, and here's why the right is to blame, right? It's always constant. And I think a lot of it is malevolent. I do think a lot of it is directed. I do think a lot of it is a literal conspiracy of like mostly foreign, but some domestic actors.
There actually seems to be a pretty good break point here, not to jump in and bash on that.
Jump in. Go ahead.
When you say Candace Owens, one thing I can't help but noticing here is that a lot of what you're mentioning comes from the right. I mean, it's internal conflict within the right. It's the fight between the two sides of the right on Israel, where a huge chunk of the right, unexpectedly to me, kind of took the side of Palestine, and I would even say Hamas in the Gaza war, where Owens has spent, along with people like Stu Peters, a week plus just sort of bird dogging these crazy rumors and the murder of Charlie Kirk, who most of us have spoken to, at least casually. I mean, it's been extremely surprising to hear. And you've now got this sort of alt-right trend where these people like Red Pill Media, a lot of whom honestly strike me as saboteurs based in countries like Pakistan. If you do 5 minutes of work tracking down some of these boys that are saying things like, well, why should we ever bother to recruit the Indian or the Nigerian business voter? Those people, they have to be deported. Deport 100 million people. We should have an all-white right wing. Most of this seems to be tension within the right. And a lot of it seems heavily funded by external actors.
Yes.
And I mean, Charles obviously hasn't brought a question yet, but quickly, what's your take on that?
Just really quickly, I'll say when Trump took over the GOP and he got rid of the old establishment, we lost a layer of antibiotic response to a lot of this brainwashing that's going on the right. The right was uniquely susceptible to some of these leftist ideas that I would say that this leftist foreign policy. I call this the Howard Zinification of the right. Right, it's or the Zinification of the right, where it's this. This is where James Lindsay calls these people woke right, and where he makes a good point, because it is literally the postmodern view that the societies are divided up into oppressors and oppressed. The United States are the oppressors, and the innocent Palestinians are the oppressed, and therefore, the United States is the great empire of evil, and their enemy or their allies, Israel, as well. But some of this comes from the libertarian movement. Some of this comes out of like the Rothbardian movement. Some of this comes from like the Dave Smiths and some of these other types who their ideologues for this kind of stuff. They definitely participate in this postmodern, They definitely are part of this, but they're more the intellectuals advancing these ideals. But it's really it's a little bit more insidious from the libertarian angle on this. But as for the Zoomers, they don't have a layer of antibiotic response to it because they never went through a libertarian phase, and so therefore they never spent any time really studying Thomas Sowell. They read Thomas Sowell quotes on Twitter, and what is Thomas Sowell quotes posting? Not Thomas Sowell quotes. Is posting a lot of retarded bullshit. You'll see like the Frederick Bastiat account, like talking about why tariffs are good, and it's like that man committed his entire life to destroying the arguments of tariffs. So I mean, there's no antibiotic response because there's no intellectualism. There's only like trad wife tits while baking cookies, Zoomer videos, and so they can't resist this brainwashing because they don't have an antibiotic. They don't have the intellectual founding to break it down. They just think post a Pat Buchanan meme and it's based.
I think that's a really good point. Charles Love, the big hoss. I mean, we got 4 guys here. We're all pretty talkative. Let's get you in here. What's your question for AP? What do you think about this woke right? Anything else?
What do I want to say? Where I think I want to go next is the libertarians get a lot of flack, often rightly so, but because we spend so much time on that, we don't often talk about, one, why they see the issues with the right or the left, why people believe we need another party. So I want to talk a little bit about, Will and I are both right-leaning conservative people who aren't, card-carrying members of the Republican Party. And so we never really get an opportunity to say why, right? So here, I think it's important to talk about the issues within the movement on the right and the Republican Party specifically, because the right, you talked about some of those issues, and a lot of them are social media based, and as Brooks likes to rightly point out, a bunch of bots stirring the pot. But there's a problem within the party, right? So the Libertarian Party exists as it is because you look at the mainstream party that's supposed to be fostering liberty, and they don't. Obviously, there's a distinct difference between the Democrats and Republicans now because the Republicans have completely lost their mind. I mean, the Democrats have completely lost their mind. But, 8, 10, 12 years ago, pre-Obama, you couldn't really tell the difference that much, right? It's like one wanted big government and one wanted insanely big government, right? One at least talked about things we liked, about freedom and liberty and limited government, but they didn't actually do it. They talked about it. So talk a bit about that, how all the things you mentioned are right. The toxic discourse, the cultural rot, the lack of intellectual honesty or even knowledge. We're not teaching kids anymore. All that kind of stuff is true. But at the same time, the Republicans aren't what they're supposed to be and what they profess to be. So talk about some of those issues that they have within the party and the things that, are exacerbating the problem while they're, facing issues.
Well, we're in a transition period. Great analysis and good questions, Sarah. Thank you for those. We're in a transition period because Trump has always been a transitional figure. He comes in and he creates the Trump era of the Republican Party, but it was always going to be transitive because Trump himself is not an ideologue. You could say George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, and to an extent Ronald Reagan, had ideologies. They had ideas and things that they believed and that they wanted to advance. Whereas Trump is more of a pure nationalist, so he believes in America first, and he wants to advance policies that he think are good, that he thinks are good for America. And sometimes those policies work out really well for us, and sometimes those other policies don't. But because it doesn't, there's no book of Trumpism to some extent. There's not going to be adherence in a way because it'll be difficult to take a Trump movement and move it forward into the future because J.D. Vance himself is nothing like Donald Trump. They have very little in common. And so even J.D. Vance will struggle to retain the mantle. I don't think that he's a shoo-in, for example, to be the next Republican presidential nominee, as much as a lot of people might wish for that to happen. And I don't have a strong opinion about that either way. But at the moment, what you could say is that when Donald Trump steps down, he takes his ball and he goes home. And I think he takes all of everything with him. To some extent, his legacy will be some positive things on DEI. His legacy will probably be the Supreme Court, maybe is his most powerful legacy and the best thing. But you could also give some credit to people like Mitch McConnell and others on that. But I would say that in the next 2 years after Donald Trump finishes his term, that is really going to be the chaos because a lot of people have tried to be like Donald Trump. They've tried to act like Donald Trump, but nobody can copy it. Nobody has been able to pull it off. And so I think there will be a new opportunity soon to redefine the Republican Party again, as Donald Trump did. He redefined the Republican Party, made it in his own image. The next person probably isn't going to be able to create that level of a cult of personality. There'll be some aspect to it, but we might be headed for something like a Romney fever swamp where you kind of have these sort of like squishy, wishy-washy Republicans, and they're going to lose national elections, and Democrats are going to be, we're going to have a president, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Gavin Newsom, ticket kind of a thing. So we might be headed for some painful years. But the Republican Party doesn't really believe in anything right now other than Trump.
That's my point.
It doesn't.
Right. It's like
it doesn't.
You mentioned your personal disagreement on social issues, and we can argue whether they're right or wrong, but that used to be part of their platform. I don't even think that's the case anymore, right?
No.
So they don't have that. They don't want to lower taxes. They don't want a smaller government.
Nope.
They don't want, I don't know what they want.
No, they want whatever Trump wants in that moment. They want whatever Trump wants today. And if Trump wants something different tomorrow, then they want that. And that's just what it is. And in order to survive, you really have to be an ultimate Machiavellian to survive and to thrive in the Republican Party. If you are not reading the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene and studying Sun Tzu and the Art of War, and if you are not just a clear, pure, either grifter or a grabber or a glommer onto power, it's the time of courtesans, or not the courtesans, but what do you call it? Courtiers? Not the courtesans, are the hookers. Yeah. The courtiers are the people. If you want to make it in the Republican Party today,
there's plenty of courtesans in the.
There are a lot of courtesans. I'm sure there are.
Yeah, they tend to go together when you get to a political capital. Yeah, a lot of them around.
Yes, but it's all gamesmanship. It's all power games. And that's why you'll see the people who are willing to be the most craven and the least principled are the ones who are going to thrive in that environment. If we had a leader who was an ideologue or was rallying around a set of ideas or a platform, for example, then you might see people who are adherents of that idea, of those ideals, tend to rise to the top. But because there's no intellectual base and founding, there's nothing to stand on. It's just pure power games. And that's why you see the grifters are the ones who benefit the most, because if you have no ideological founding, if you don't care about anything but your own power or your money, now is a great time for people like that to thrive. It's unfortunate, right, but that's what the environment that we live in, at least in my opinion.
Can I ask one last,
Sure.
Will, looked like you were going to say something, but I wanted to ask one last kind of situational question, and not specifically just to Austin, so you can address, any of you can address that as well. But earlier, he mentioned, when he talked about the government shutdown, and he mentioned the SNAP as an example of something he was talking about. And it made me think about that. Like, if you think about what the Republicans, written principles were 20 to 30 years ago, right? Whether it was a winning strategy or not is different, but it would not have been odd to hear somebody say that we should help our fellow man and we should help our Americans who are struggling. But no one ever said it was the government's job to feed everyone who needed food. So, if we had more liberty, lower taxes, and we incentivized people to do that, just like we had, charities and churches, because Austin was talking about how people were doing that. There was, even in Chicago, Manny's Deli, there were companies saying, come in and show your card and we'll feed the family of 4 for free. So there'll be ways for that to happen. And I think somehow we lost that. I mean, I have friends who are immigrants and they didn't come here in the 30s and 40s or after World War II. They came here in the 90s. And they're like, the country I came from, there was no safety net. You moved in with your family, or you went to, you begged on the street, or you went to people you knew or your church. There was no government place to go. So is there, all of you, a Republican in today's party that would say that? Or even 10 years ago, who would say that?
No, the FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt won the country. And I like to refer to his For Freedom speech. In 1941, he gave the State of the Union address, and he outlined 4 essential human freedoms that he believed all people should have. And one was freedom of speech and expression. The other one was freedom of worship. And the last 2 were really the kickers, where he kind of one-shotted the country, because freedom from fear meant security from aggression and the threat of war. So he's preparing us for World War II. But the freedom from want was really the most important one, because at that point in time, Americans did have an idea of the United States as a country of benevolent Wookiee associations that provided health care to the people in their community, right? Mm-hmm. But freedom from want in the FDR definition was economic security and a basic standard of living for all. So it really was that New Deal, that was a moment where we diverged to a country where Ronald Reagan, his Time for Choosing speech is considered to be one of the most powerful conservative speeches in the 20th century. But what a lot of people don't know is, if you've never read the whole entire speech or listened to the entire speech, is that he specifically says that even the Republican Party now accepts Social Security and welfare programs as part of, that part of the New Deal, while saying, but we still think that you should have to work or do these other things. but
But if you don't, we'll give you stuff.
but if we don't, we'll give you stuff. And
I'm just
so,
suggesting you
yeah,
weren't, right?
and so most Americans now believe in the FDR definition of freedom, not the George Washington definition of freedom, not the founding fathers, not the libertarian, not the Thomas Sowell version of freedom. They believe in freedom from want. That because it's a difficult argument to debunk when you say, if you're hungry, if you're starving, are you really free? No, you're enslaved to your desire, to the basic levels of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're not fulfilling your basic needs, therefore you don't have freedom because you have to do everything that you can to try and meet those needs. And so that's a very powerful argument for most people, because if you don't think about it, or if you've only put a surface level thought into what freedom is, you've only taken your civics class in 6th and 7th grade and that was it, then you might not ever be introduced to the idea of freedom, which is a freedom from oppression, right? So we see ourselves as taking burdens off of people's backs. The Democrats see themselves as it's our job to hand them nice heavy pots full of chicken, right?
Put a chicken in it.
A chicken in every pot. Exactly.
Well,
So that's how I would answer that.
Brooks, my new mayor said that there's no problem too large and no concern too small.
Yeah, you better get out of there, Charles.
I mean, Mom Donnie came out and
put
said
on
the
an eye patch.
opposite of Ronald Reagan, right? I mean, so like Reagan's famous line is the 9 scariest words are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And Zoran came out on the stage and said, Charles, you just quoted it perfectly, like there's no problem so big that the government, the people combined, can't save you from it. So, I mean, we have gotten into a weird space. I mean, to answer the question you asked, I mean, at least my take on it, I think it's just damned hard to get humans to give up what seems like a good thing that they've already been given. And I think this is true for things on the left and things on the right. I mean, stuff that came from the GOP, like the interstate highways that covered the dirt roads. I mean, no one's going back and planning to accept that maybe your community should have to do some work to reach the next town. I mean, the big army, no one's really, we're not going to see forces of Minutemen formed again. I mean, there's plenty of stuff on the right where we've unified and done things in construction, space travel, war that are amazing. But I think there's a deeper point when it comes to the left. And this gets into some data that I've seen recently that a buddy put together. I think this may have actually been Chris Hayden at my own university. I forget where the set came from. But most Americans today find it very hard to believe that you should ever be allowed to face a risk of dying. So at a certain level, if you are a free man or woman in the real sense, and you're very ill, and you go through your savings, you go through your family, you go through your charity, there's a certain point where it's going to be you and the disease or you and the pistol by your bed, and you're going to eventually make the choice to be or not to be. It's one of the most famous lines in literature. And we tend to dislike that. We think that the state at that point should step in and should do everything possible to give you those last couple of months of life. And if you actually look at what our medical care programs spend most of their money on, it's actually doing that. It's like pushing people through the last little bit of keeping that ember flickering. And I'll bluntly say, I don't think that's a good logical thing for them to be doing, but it's going to be very, very hard to reset that in people's minds.
Can I ask you a question, though, Will?
Society has to come and care for you. And last point, the awful reality under that is that there's actually just some person that instead of you or your father or your mother is now making that decision. Like in Canada, doctors will frequently, it's called MAID, as you all know. They'll just say, hey, we think you should kill yourself. Like your disease is advancing to a certain
They're
point.
nicer about it.
No, but I mean, we gave you this
It's like
bullshit
5%
government
of the
insurance. We
total
don't let you
death.
buy your own anymore. Here's a rope. I mean, so like MAID is now the cause of something like, you guys can fact check me, but I believe 6% of all deaths in Canada, 7% of all elder female deaths. So the reality of life can't be averted. And this is something that came up in our discussion with Big Charles Murray last week about death. You know, are there near-death experiences, after-death experiences? At a certain point, you're going to die. You can't change that. You should be as well prepared for that as you can be. You should live a good life. We try to block that. We try to block that knowledge as much as we can. All these programs do that. But yeah, the horrifying knowledge itself, Americans really don't like. Let
me ask you a question real quick, Will. You said that, and I agree with everything you said, and I disagree that we need to get, I don't know how we undo that. But even in what you said, when you say what people believe, you still had a proper hierarchy. And I don't even think people believe that anymore. You said that, you go to mom and dad and then your cousins and then the community, your next door neighbor, and then the church. And if none of them can help you you buy the bed with the gun, you say, well, maybe people think the government should step in and help. Well, they inverted it. They're like, if you miss a meal, the first person you call is the government. That's how crazy this is done.
That's very true. And it's actually weird for me to have gone from Chicago to not really Appalachia. We're like a mile for about an hour from the foothills, but like to Kentucky, heartland America. I've got a lot of buddies in Southern Illinois as well. Because like here, I do think like when I see friends from Southern Illinois, or when I talk to my buddies down here, I think most people would do the normal hierarchy. Like you have a medical bill, you pay it, you take out some debt, your wife as a credit line, your father, and you go up through that as much as you can, and you have your own private insurance, which is much better. I do think back home, most people, yeah, you probably would use either workplace or something like Medicaid, and the first thing you're going to is that vast institutional
Call
structure.
311 and say, how do I find money if I need?
Yeah. Well, and there's a whole thing that goes along with that, like where, I mean, Dave Ramsey, actually, I'm not going to drag him into this. He kind of mocked this model, but like a common piece of financial advice is what do you do with a big medical bill? Just don't pay it. They're going to break it down. And I'm not even going to criticize the advice. It's $50,000, but like you're very much outside your community. You're using governmental or big business insurance to cover something from a major for-profit player. No one that you know is involved. You're going to break that bill down over probably 50 years. It's impersonal systems have replaced much of what we used to do in personal life. And I'm being a bit glib about this, but it seems very, very difficult to reverse. And that's a real issue. Yeah. I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah. I don't know.
All right. Now, on another note, one thing I do want to get to, because we've had a good conversation about this, but Austin actually sent me a piece that he wanted to talk about really more than some of these political issues, which is time.com. Teens today are the biggest cowards in history, I believe is a quote here. It's not his line, but teens today are having sex, dating, drinking, going out less often than they used to. Many of them don't even have a driver's license. 3-minute read. This is by Amanda Macmillan. This, by the way, goes back to September 19, 2017. So all this data has gotten a lot worse since then. And it's kind of weird that as conservative males, we're saying, well, this is getting to the point where it's bad, especially if we're focusing on female teens here. But it's weird. Like 30% of males by the end of, only 30% of men by the end of senior high school have had sex, have had a committed girlfriend that they've slept with once. Most of them don't have a driver's license. Most of them don't have a job. Most of them don't drink. A lot of them do smoke weed. They sit on their ass and smoke weed. Austin, what do you think about this? What's up with these kids? They seem to be totally non-risk taking. They're not varsity athletes anymore. Don't join the army anymore. What's going on? What can we do about it?
Well, you say, that it it's odd for like conservatives to be saying this kind of stuff. But when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I mean, the conservative young people who they were drinking and having sex. I mean, they were the jocks. They were the football guys. These were men who, they dated women. And the thing is that there's something about a relationship with a woman that once you've had it as a man, you've got like maybe you've had a couple of girlfriends and not just sex or sexual intercourse, that definitely changes your viewpoints of things. But if you had men who had relationships, healthy relationships with women, or just any relationship with women at any point, you would be a lot more realistic about what you're actually going to be able to accomplish politically. So, for example, the last couple of days, we have seen influencers posting serious screeds, video essays about repealing the 19th Amendment because of young women voting for Zohran Mamdani. And we know that liberal white females are jihadists for the left in this country at this point now, right? But the problem is that when you don't have experience,
white, I've got to say. But
mostly white. A lot of the
as bad though. I do feel like white women get an unfair brick.
Black men voted for Trump. Okay, so black men are far more based than white women in this country.
I'm saying like black women and Hispanic women, and I'll give my
Yes.
comment after your comment, but like I
But
think
they don't
white
have the
women
same
do
power.
take it kind of unfairly about this.
Yeah, but they don't have the same kind of cultural cachet that white women do because they don't
Fair.
express the same level of economic activity, which is power in a society and a culture. I would say that they're also a minority, right? So the majority, the white liberal female majority, express cultural power. But when you've had relationships with these people, you'll actually have an understanding of what you're going to be able to accomplish because at least when I was growing up, women dominated everything in school. So they now dominate everything even more than before. And they rule with an iron fist. You want to talk about like tyranny and petty tyranny. If you stick out or stand out in any way, it's tall poppy syndrome. They're going to cut you down and try and make everybody conform because women don't like to confront one another the way that men do. They don't do it openly. They do it behind the backs and things like that. And that explains a lot of our political outcomes that you see today, right? We don't have symmetrical warfare. You have to have asymmetrical warfare. You have to pretend like you're a nice guy. You have to be like Zoran Mandani. You have to have this really nice smile and all that stuff while you've got the hammer and the sickle behind your back. If we saw this actually after Zoran Mandani won, gone was the nice guy, and here comes the angry guy, flaming Andrew Cuomo. And there was the real Zoran Mandani. But in order to get elected, he had to appease women. And so he had to appear nice and he had to appear sweet and he had to pretend like he was a really nice guy until he finally had power. And so I think that the lack of relationships that men have, and the fact that they're not having sex and they're not dating these women, it's creating a twofold effect. One, it's most men, conservative men, because they're not having these relationships with women like they did in the 80s and 90s, they don't understand the female brain. And then two, females who are not having sex are quite frustrated and are getting involved in politics. And because they're not taking up their time with relationships with men, they're also being harmed by that because they've got so much time on their hands that they're devoting it to political activity and activism. Is there data supplying a lot of these views and beliefs? Some. It's sketchy. Is some of this, subjective? Yes. Could I be wrong? Sure. This is just my hunch. My supposition is that the fact that these young people are involuntary celibates and that they're proud of it, and that we have these communities of men who are celebrating. It used to be that you were voluntarily celibate. You had the Christians and the conservatives who were waiting for marriage, and they were voluntarily celibate. They were holding themselves back from marriage and having sex. And now we have the involuntary celibates, and they're creating their own communities, which, of course, what happens when you get with a group of other alcoholics or other drug users? What do? You all get together and you all reinforce your behaviors. So you've got these communities, especially these online communities of involuntary celibates who are now they're flaunting it. And some of them, it's driving them to psychosis. But I think that the lack of healthy relationships between young men and women, including sexual relationships, is creating these kinds of psychoses that we're seeing. And I think, you see it with some of these shooters. I think the transgenderism is part and parcel of that, right? They're not having healthy relationships with the opposite sex because they've all got their mobile phones out to some extent. They're doing online dating. You guys, I don't know if you guys are married. I got married. I got the last helicopter out of Saigon.
Yeah, same.
But I did spend like a few years before I met my current wife. I did spend a few years on the dating apps, the Tinders, the Bumbles, all that stuff. Oh my God, dudes, it is hell. If you're not single right now, you need to count your blessings and it's not just the women. I'm sure that the men have their issues too, but it was, swipe left if you voted for Trump. This would have been like 2016. Swipe left. Everybody thinks swipe left if you voted for Trump. So I feel bad for the young men to some extent, but also some of the problems are that they need to get their heads out of the phone. They need to go down to the club and they need to approach a woman. They need to talk to her. They need to figure out what the touch of a woman is. And they need to understand how women think, right? If you don't understand how women think, how are you ever going to be able to build society? How are you going to build civilization? How are you going to be a defender of Western civilization if you don't know how to fuck? If you don't know how to If you don't know how to conquer a woman in bed, how are you going to conquer a nation? Right? There's the only virgin leader that I can ever think of from history was the Virgin Queen Elizabeth, and it was a female. You can get away with it if you're a woman, but
And
not
not a
if you're a
virgin.
man. Not men, not men, not males. There's no virgin kings from history. There's one virgin queen. That's it, right? And it's an important thing to be able to understand the opposite sex, right? Can you speak to them? Can you seduce them? Can you woo them? These are important things for society and civilization. We don't talk about it a lot because we're all up our own asses about sex. The Americans are so, even leftists and liberals, like the ones who are the most, they're still sex negative. You know, they don't like Sydney Sweeney's boobs out because men are enjoying that. They're sex negative. The left is even sex negative. They hate
They're
Sydney
actually
Sweeney.
far more sex negative. That, like, that seems like another natural breakpoint. Like feminists, obviously in life, like certain groups tend to be good at certain things, and some things are dominant in favor of one group or another. Like actual fucking is usually pretty male dominant if you're talking about like the missionary or doggy position with someone you like. There's nothing wrong with that. Like the mating dance where women are, you're paying for dates and trying to get with someone you love, tends to be pretty female dominant. Like all of this is just natural. This happens with animals. So, I mean, I think that a lot of people have a basic problem with this. The manosphere guys, by the way, have a problem with the second thing. Like you should never pay for dates. You should never chase these broads. But like the basic idea that women like dating men and sometimes being quote unquote dominated by men and like having heterosexual sex with normal men is a real problem for feminists. Like just scroll through Twitter.
Yeah.
Like what kind of woman can like doing that disgusting, filthy thing? Like you see a lot of projection here. I'm not going to go any more into this. It's a family podcast, you know, but it's pretty obvious what's going
Sorry
on.
for the language.
So I think that all this spills out into the normal conversation, and without all the like the men and women argue conquest and all that. Yeah, I think if you've never been in a fight or never traveled overseas, you've never had sex with anyone, if you're not aware of what actual female sexuality is like or what the minds of different people read like, yeah, it's going to be very hard for you to be a leader, I would say. So yeah, all this isolation and basically at a point, it's not porn. It's not even just not dating. It's all the isolation and weirdness of cyber society has created isolated and weird people. And the question is how to get them back to normalcy. They can't drive. They don't brawl. They don't fuck. A lot of them don't have jobs really. How do you bring those people into the mainstream? And I would agree it's a bigger problem for men than for women. Like being a non-warrior who's a little autistic and who hasn't had sex that much and who's cute and a little cringy, like that's kind of cool if you're a girl and you're 20. You're a big guy. I mean, I don't know what you're gonna do, bro. Like you're gonna have to snap out of all of that. So
there's a really good historical analogy that I could use for this one, and great societies over time, or powerful civilizations or civilizations that desire power, they tend to go back to Arthurian legends. There's a reason why King Arthur legends are so powerful. And it's because I think it's probably true that men need quests. It's probably true that men need brotherhood. And it's probably true that men need to capture a holy grail or find at least, and the holy grail is probably not the best example to use because to me the holy grail is something that you never really attain, because it's really about the journey more than it is about the destination. But men need to hunt beasts and take trophies, right? Men, that's why I think martial arts, I'm a martial arts instructor, and I see this. I've become a martial arts instructor just in the last couple of years, but I had been a martial artist for 20 years, and now I see it in a very different light. I didn't realize. Now I learn more as a teacher than I did as a student, because now I see what's happening and how my students are changing, especially the young men, because they lack purpose. They have no goal in life. They have no direction. But then if they take to it, if they want to get a belt level up, or they want to compete in a tournament, right? Or they want to, get better or get better at a certain kick or something. Mm-hmm. You see them with that goal in mind, and they're focused on that goal, and it changes them. So there's an interesting historical anecdote to that too. there was this castle. It was the one that inspired Wolfenstein 3D, the video games. But during World War II, the SS did all these crazy, experiments at this castle. But they had this one, and maybe it wasn't Wewelsburg, but it was Heinrich Himmler had this occult sanctum, and he actually recreated the Knights of the Round Table because they were convinced that they needed to give the great men of society some important things, tasks to do, or else the princes, the dukes, the archdukes, the counts, right, the great men of your society, if they are left to their own devices, will go out and create trouble. So the concept of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, it's not a Nazi story, but it's just that's a fascinating aspect of it. But the concept of the Knights of the Round Table is a story about brotherhood, and it's a story about taking the men who would. And one of the men actually does destroy the kingdom because, he goes off on his own and then he sleeps with King Arthur's wife, Lancelot, I think, and destroys Camelot because the great men, the powerful men of society, he had broken from the Knights of the Round Table. So there probably needs to be, to some extent, there needs to be a round tabling in our culture or civilization. There should be quests. Right there, right now, men don't know what is because of all the transgenderism and the gender confusion. There's like, what are the milestones of manhood? What are the quests? Right? Do you go to the Middle East and fight in a sandpit for some vague concept of democracy? It's not the same thing as fighting in World War II against Hitler or Tojo or the Mussolini. It's a completely different thing. There you have a cause. There's a holy grail there. There's something to aim for. And so I think that aimlessness, a lack of brotherhood, and a lack of quests is what is tearing our society apart. It's because young men are aimless and they're not achieving the trophies of manhood because there's nothing to bring them together. There is no round table. So everybody's just Lancelotting, sleeping with everybody else's wives, right? And then in thruples.
That's a good summary point there. Brooks, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with you on the World War II sandpit analogy. I would say those of us that went over there, brotherhood was the reason. I mean, that's ultimately what became the mission was the man on your left and right. And so I tend to agree with that. We haven't had a World War, and that's the thing. I saw a thing with Konstantin Kisin recently where he basically said that, what we see is that most generations get their knowledge from the previous two generations, right? And so we have a slight memory of World War II, almost none of World War I, and so really all we know is kind of the post-war era. And I tend to agree with you. I'm a big follower of story and mythos as really good frameworks of inherited wisdom for how to be, and certainly Camelot is I would say a biblical derivative, but one of those to be sure. And there's something to be said. You as a martial arts instructor, you've certainly seen the fact that those who are competent and capable at violence are usually the last ones to be reckless with it, the last ones to act, right? And that's kind of meek, right? That's the master of the sword who will keep it sheathed because he doesn't have to unsheath it because he doesn't have anything to prove because he knows that he's competent in that. And so I think those are really important points to add to what you just said. But yeah, go ahead, Will.
Oh, I've been doing enough of the talking here. I want to hear what Charles has to say. Like, Charles, what do you think about this? I mean, what do you think is going on with these kids? Like, we often get to these mythological kind of discussions, but just at a basic level, like 30% of the kids have sex by freshman year of college. Half of them have a driver's license. You've been a leader a lot. In a practical sense, how are we going to get these boys in particular back to normal?
Like all of our problems, it's a big one. We are, people should check out the pod because we do a good job of covering things thoroughly. And we've talked about this a lot. It made me think of our interview with Jeremy Adams. He's a high school teacher in California. He wrote a book called Hollowed Out. And he noticed it from a classroom standpoint. He used to do this thing every year where he'd ask them these questions, social questions, who's the biggest star, whatever. He said they would change. But then he'd ask about, Speaker of the House, your senator, all this other stuff. And he said, and nobody ever knew. No big deal. Because of, these kids just tend to, not care. They have a different mindset at that age. But what he noticed was what changed was when he did it early in his career, they would say, oh, he would give them the answers, George Bush or whatever. And, oh, yeah, my mom likes him, or my dad doesn't like that politicians or whatever. And then he noticed 7, 8 years ago, they just would have no reference points because he found out the parents weren't sitting with them and having dinner together, right? There's so many single family homes. If there's one parent in the home and they're working, they got to work a lot of hours. So there's not that time together that's spent. And we talked about the same thing, the lack of sex. He said they don't go to the football game like we used to do. And when they are together, they're all on the phones. I had a high school student on once on the pod, and she talked about, this was during COVID, but she talked about going through a whole class one day, coming into class, sitting down, teaching instructions, they get up and they leave, and no student ever spoke. Right? The work was on the device because it was COVID and they never had to interact. And all the boys, she's like, the thing I found out is pretty interesting, right? So all the boys found a way to hack the homework on the device so they could get into games. So all they did was game in class, or they'd say, oh, I can't get it to work or whatever. So you had this, so we have this, so my point is we have this social problem, but everything we're doing is exacerbating that problem, right? We say that they're tethered to these devices, but then we give them to them. Like, how many times have you all been out and seen a single mom out with a couple of kids, and the way to appease them and to keep them quiet is to hand them their phone when they're a toddler, right? You're talking 2, 3, and 4-year-old, give them the phone. Or, the girlfriend and the boyfriend want to have a date night, give them the phone. So you go to the restaurant, everybody got the 6, 7, and 8-year-olds have a tablet, right? And now we're teaching it in school. So we're pushing that. You're right. I mean, you're right about the dating. They don't know how to talk to each other. As Will likes to say, the boys have no game. So you got all these problems. There's a depression problem. There's an expectation problem. We went from keeping up with the Joneses to not really understanding what happiness looked like because we have nothing to mirror. And then you talk about how to fix it. It's hard, right? Because Brooks said we learn from the previous generation. We also learn from examples. Who's our cultural example? Right? Just in general, who's our cultural example? We got Trump, because he's the president, who's not the nicest guy, right? The mean tweets and such. We have Taylor Swift, who finally settled down from her 11th boyfriend. I think, how many albums she got? I think she's got 2 boyfriends for every album, right? So everyone people look up to, I mean, we're all flawed, but I mean, it's never changed. But the people we look up to, in many ways, either put their flaws on front for people to see, that they lead with it. I mean, think about it. The Kardashians made hundreds of millions of dollars in a whole career off of a sex tape and putting their dirt on TV. You got reality TV, you got all this stuff. So I don't know why we fix it when we don't have good examples to follow. No one's reads, right? We don't teach civics. We don't teach enough in school. I mean, I look at some of the books that they use to teach people, kids, and in many cases they're bad. But even when they're not bad, they're not really. We don't. We've created a culture where we moved away from the classics because the classics are racist, or represent the patriarchy. Well, we read Russian literature because they're damn good at writing and understanding the human condition. That's why we read Dostoevsky, not because he's white. Right? We read everything that you see in the movies is derivative of Shakespeare for a reason, right? So if we say we have no examples, if we say we don't have models, if we say give everybody a device, and then we say let's take anything that they might pick up and read that has substance and give them all fluff, what do you expect them to have? So we know the problems, but I mean, I think it's a cultural, that's why I talk about the culture so much. I think it's a cultural societal problem. And we're trying to fix it lastly through politics. While important, and while we can't take our foot off the gas, we are not going to fix the fact that 50.6% of the people in New York decided to vote for a guy and openly said in the exit poll, do you think he can do what he said he wanted to do? No, he can't do that stuff. So why did you vote for him? I don't know. Right. So we can't fix, and we can't, excuse me, we can't fix our problems. We can't fix the transgender issue by voting for people who think it's bad. Because then what are they really going to do? It's better to have them there than somebody who's pushing it. True. Right. But they're not really fixing the problem. There's a reason why, I don't know what the number is, Will, what percentage of teenage to 20-year-old girls identify as, trans or LGBT or queer or something.
25%.
Right? That's not even possible.
Yeah, well,
But
it
even
does
the
it doesn't mean
LGBTQ
anything. Like
organizations used to say they were 5%.
the percentage of women in that range, not to be crude, but that have actually gone down on a woman is like 2%. So they're all saying things like I identify as non-binary, I identify as like theoretically bisexual. The percentage of lesbians has actually gone down from what it used to be in the past, which is
Right.
kind of depressing, by the way. Like all the tomboy, like kind of badass lesbians, like
Right.
they'll be in the
They
fire
wouldn't be
department, they'll
boys
do
now.
about as good a job as the men. That's actually down. They're all something else now. They're taking these crazy drugs. So I
Right.
mean that's no good.
And so the last thing I'll say is, with all the other terrible things that I just said, to make it worse, the other reason you can't fix it is so Austin clearly pointed out the problems that we have problems in the society writ large, but real serious problems we have with boys. We've been, talking about the war on boys. We've been talking about boys for years. Now they have no game. They're afraid to talk to girls, all this other stuff we mentioned. But then the few who break through and get up the courage to do something about it and break out of that shell, this is what they have to deal with. Very toxic, feminists who just hate them. You hear words in the ether about toxic masculinity and boys are this and boys are that. So even if they do break out, they're going to go right back in when they see the madness that they have to face. So
You guys see the
unfortunately, I
rape
don't answer that.
spectrum? Did you guys see the rape spectrum on Twitter today?
Yes.
I did not.
What?
Is that?
No.
Got like 128,000 likes.
Oh,
I'm not going to
no.
screen share because it wouldn't make any sense for people that are watching the pod, but like some feminists shared what Ella actually, who we all know, put together as a joke. But it was like, would you consider the following things to be rape? And the first half of the spectrum was just
Pizza.
normal relationship stuff. Like I give my boyfriend a blowjob because I don't want to have sex. Like I have sex when tired because my partner wants to. Like having sex with an unenthusiastic sex worker. I'm not a big supporter of that one, but that was like 12%. This is brutal rape. Like, and just on and on. Like I lie about my hobbies sometimes to close on a date. 17% said brutal rape. And I mean, so this was posted, and feminists started sharing this and saying, yes, even male bros now are accepting that rape is a spectrum. Everything on this is rape. If you go over to my page, you can look at it. But I mean, I posted this and said, like, I'm not practicing, but like I trained as a lawyer at a pretty good school. Like almost nothing on this is actually rape. Rape is the few things at the bottom where someone says, no, I don't want to have sex with you, and you have sex with them. Like you guys are taking just these normal dating experiences, like she rolls on top in the morning, and saying that you're victims of sexual violence. But this is actually a really big problem. Like if you are in a relationship with someone and she's been trained to view normal male heterosexuality, or like even her own desire to sleep with a dominant normal guy, as abuse, as rape, like one of the worst crimes, then it's going to be hard to fucking do anything. So like
Right.
this is really like it's not an exaggeration to say that like the dating policies for a lot of colleges have been written by actual man-hating lesbians. That's not an exaggeration at all. Like Julie Bindel, who I don't dislike, is a female writer who wrote the column Why I Hate Men. Like funny, witty person, you can have a drink with her, but she actually is a British lesbian that doesn't like dudes. If you are a heterosexual that is trying to figure out what it feels like to date happy women, you probably should not follow what a blue-haired English lesbian writer says about dating. I don't know the hair color right now, but I mean, this is just obvious common sense. And it's the feminist stuff has really gone off the charts. To some extent, men are allowing this. Not like we should swing whips and crack down on it, but there's no response. Guys are still treating it like it's cute and charming. Like 4B is a feminist movement based around the idea that women shouldn't talk to, sleep with, kiss, or marry men. And guys are often like, well, we can't really compete with them. We did bad things 100 years ago. It's the same thing that was tolerated with Black Americans, right? Like this is really just, it's nonsensical. It's much crazier than anything you hear from the male side. So the patience needs to end with all this crap from the minority side, all this new alt-right crap from the white side. I would assume if you actually looked at violent extreme talk on X or any other site between men and women, about 80% of the craziest stuff, like never give a blowjob, it means he hates you, like that stuff would come entirely from women. And that really is an issue for normal relationships.
And last thing I want to say to make it even worse, you made a good point about what goes on in college campuses, but it doesn't end there because most of the place that most women met their husbands, if it wasn't college, used to be work, but now you're afraid to ask somebody at work out, or at risk of losing your job, and now all these crazy videos they show you, so you can't even do it at work. You don't even escape it when you leave college. You can't even do it at work.
I mean, I think the
I
reality
read them
is,
all speechless.
I actually will say one thing about this. So I haven't done my like amoral business guy comment for today. So here it is. One thing people should remember is that this is all bullshit. Like in reality, like I grew up as kind of a hood kid and went into the college world without knowing this and just dated people normally. And I'm actually not an abuser as far as I know. So this never came up. I mean, in reality, very, very few people, if you're just a normal person who like kisses someone without asking for 8 forms of notarized consent, very, very few people are going to dislike that. If someone does, they're going to like slap you on the head. They're not going to enter the legal system. So I do think guys are kind of burdening themselves with a whole bunch of horse shit by taking this seriously. Like if you're at all a quote unquote dominant person, a quote unquote patriarchal person, even to the very limited extent I am, I mean, you just kind of have to accept that risk exists. Like in the past, the risk of dating aggressive women was that they might poison you or their brother might kill you. So, I mean, all this stuff, like, I mean, they might file a Title IX complaint form that could be just, I mean, like, life contains a certain element of risk, and people, especially men, shouldn't be cowards. But that is different from the general objection as a citizen of whatever sex to the well being poison. And all this stuff is the well being poison. Like, and last thing, I think the biggest problem here is both men and women being told that natural desire is unnatural and evil. Like that's it.
Agree. Have you guys ever seen that episode of Survivor where they separate them by gender and they send the men out to their own island and then the women out to their own island, and like 24 hours the women are like preparing to cannibalize each other, and within 24 hours men have created fire, built a society, put things together. Probably the sad reality is that it's going to take some kind of a national tragedy to bring us back together, where women are going to realize that they need men, because what we have done is we've built a society where they don't need us to a certain extent. And the more divorced women are from comprehension of how important masculinity is into their lives, the more they're going to vote for the Zoran Mandanis, for the beta males, for the soy jacks, who are going to, the more they're just going to look at government as their dad. They're going to look at government as their pay pig. And of course, the OnlyFans community makes that worse, exacerbates it to a certain extent. Throughout human history, men needed women and women needed men. Now we're in a society where men need women, but women don't need men. And women are incapable to a large extent of understanding that most of the modern conveniences that have given them this freedom were invented by men, created by men. I think there's a lot of truth to some of those meme posts that go around, that when women are fighting for equality, they're not fighting for equality for the jobs out on the oil rigs.
Yeah, bricklayers, right?
Yeah, they're not fighting for equality in those jobs, right? They're fighting for superiority. And they've been granted it in large swaths of society. So absent, I think, some kind of an earth-shattering event that shows just how fragile they really are and their places really are, I don't see things changing. And, I don't think a world war would be a good thing, but I think that some kind of massive struggle that takes away sort of some of the modern conveniences that people enjoy right now. It's kind of the joke. Bill Burr used to have a segment about it. He was talking about there are no feminists in House Fire. You can have the angriest feminist, and then when the Titanic goes down, oh, I'm just a girl, put me on the lifeboat, right? And that is, I think that's that sobering moment that really shows you the difference between the genders. But we don't see it now because we're not on the Titanic. But in that kind of a lifeboat scenario, I think it really shows the difference between sex. And that's the quest. That's when men distinguish themselves. The men who stand up and lift the women and the children up into the lifeboats and act as the heroes, they show themselves to be men of superior character and of capability. So absent some kind of Titanic level event, I don't see this changing, because the men who are supporting the system right now Most of them are doing so. I saw a video tonight that showed all the Democratic men who were voting for Zoran Mondani, and it was all these soy boys like clapping with their like skinny little arms and things like that. And that's where society is going, right? The warrior culture has always been kind of a smaller culture, and it exists, I think, mostly on the conservative right. But here's the thing. You say you're like slightly patriarchal, right, Wilfred? But does that mean that you're slightly feminist? Because if so, then I mean, we're kind of contributing to some of the problems. In some ways, I'm not saying you, Wilfred, but I think men are typically more feminist than they really like to admit.
Oh, he's a full-on feminist.
But it depends what you mean. Like, I think almost everyone.
You want your daughter to go to a university get a 4-year degree so that she can.
I think almost everyone is a first wave feminist. Like, do I think women should be able to learn to read and drive cars and so on? Yeah.
Sure.
In reality, no one wants to return to traditional patriarchy where like the four of us would still definitely be pulled up to fight for 4 months a year during the war season. I mean, like, let's be real about what this would involve. Like women, there's several roles in society, like wife and prostitute. The vote came around in 1920. Like, no, I don't favor returning to that. So what I actually would favor in society would favor something that seems to be very unpopular on the left and increasingly unpopular on the right, which is full-on meritocracy. Like almost every position, if you're talking about real blue collar, real executive job. Now we're talking about Americans here. I'd limit H-1B pretty strictly, but I mean, like you have a set of requirements for the job and the best people compete for the job. And I think a lot of positions would look like the NBA. You're going to have a lot of Indian and Nigerian guys in some medical roles. You're going to have a lot of white guys in some business roles. You have a lot of black guys and Southern guys in some athletic positions. And that doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I think nursing, for example, would still be very, very phlebotomy, very heavily female. But I mean, I also think there'd be positions that would be very heavily combat soldiering, would be 99% male. But I'm a feminist, a term I wouldn't use for myself because I like having sex with heterosexual women. But I mean, I'm very feminist in the sense that I think you, as a woman, as a citizen woman, should have the right to compete for most things that men also compete for. Like, so no, I don't favor repealing the 19th Amendment or anything like that. And I think a lot of this is just nonsense to some extent. I mean, when people say like, we need to deport 100 million, that's the minority population of the country, right? So like, I'm not actually going to vote for that and I have a bunch of guns. If you actually came forward and said, well, my agenda is we're going to deport the minority population of the country and take the vote away from the women in the country, not saying, of course, that you're proposing this, but the question would be, what's the base for that? And I strongly suspect that would be revealed to be about 3-4% of the population. So I would support things like the best people get the best jobs. And I think the base for that is everybody.
It makes good sense. It sounds good. I'd be willing to go in that direction, but we probably do need to be, as men, we probably need to more aggressively defend our territory because there are some things that are our territory. And I think that we need to be able to draw clear lines. The problem with like the idea of a pure meritocracy is that it does in some ways lead to women stepping into UFC fighting rings with men. And I think that that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, on some level,
just once.
It happens once.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's all it would take, Brooks.
Yeah, just once.
No, I mean, like an actual one-on-one fight between the two best, like one person dies and it's a wrap. I mean, like put a cross up.
The U.S. military has tried this in some ways. They've done this social experiment. There's a really good video of a woman, I think is in the Marines, where they're doing pugilism. Yeah. And the guy comes out and he is a pure meritocratic man.
He Terry Tates her ass.
He goes full speed linebacker, bam. And of course, they're like, no. Like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you pulling him off? This is what you wanted. This was the experiment. So maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe we should.
Missing the point, right? Like, so obviously, if they call the fight out of a sense of gentlemanliness, that's fine. She lost. She's out of the Corps. But like meritocracy doesn't mean you give the woman a position after she loses. So I think both sides have been a little confused about this.
I'm just suggesting that maybe they shouldn't be in the ring in the first place. Maybe there needs to be segregation, is what I'm saying.
Oh, speaking of segregation, real quick, let's clear line this way, because that is too, that's not what I meant, Brooks. That is a little too lopsided. Will, what about, women and men categories and things, like where they're not physically attacked, golf, tennis, acting awards, whatever? Do you just have best actor and not have actress and actor?
Well, my own opinion.
Good question.
I actually don't think these are very complex questions. I mean, I think outside of basic 10 Commandments stuff, rules pretty much aren't real. So one, we can just decide to do whatever we want. But two, I'm not particularly crazy. So no, you have best.
No, but I'm saying, what is your suggestion?
Yeah, no, I'd have actress and actor because women aren't men. I mean, so no, like you would decide what jobs are male and which are female. I mean, like, and this has come up a lot with gynecologists and Hooters girls. I mean, I trained as a lawyer, right? So I don't see any reason why you have to be a male Hooters girl, dick out in the little bikini briefs. So like once you decide that 15% is over here, male, female, and by the way, like this is a problem with the feminists. So I'm not a particular fan of like, well, I would call it later wave feminism, but what people mean by feminism today. Because a lot of what we're seeing now with like the transgender movement or like this complaint about men and women's spaces, this is a direct backlash to like women and men's spaces where there'd be like a all male golf club focused on hitting the driver and like profane talk in the club. And women would try for 10 years to integrate it because business might once be done there or something. And now you have the same thing where there's a sorority, but they once had a male honorary member. So I'm trans and I'm going to join it. And I don't really see a legal way you can say that shouldn't happen. My opinion as emperor would just be that this is all BS and we should recognize that men have dicks and women have vaginas and that's the way it is. And that's 10% of jobs. For the other jobs, though, like a cop, for example, you're obviously going to have female vice detectives. What you do is you just have a baseline standard. Like you have to do this many push-ups. And if you're a woman and you meet that standard, you can be a cop. That's it.
Well, why couldn't you do that in golf and tennis?
Well, if you're a woman and you can hit the driver long enough to make the PGA Tour and you've got enough speed with the irons and so on, yeah, I mean, okay.
That's what I'm saying. So you wouldn't necessarily need an LGBT.
Well, what I would do is have the men's category. In general, like my best sport, like a boss, but like my actual best high school sport was cross country running. And I always say like 60 pounds ago. But I mean, like in cross country, the men's category is actually the open category. So like one of the people I trained with in the summers was Lisette Diaz, who went, shout out to Lisette, but who went downstate and almost won, as I recall, in Illinois for the girls in like our largest school category. And she ran with like our guys that would maybe get to state or would like run in sectionals, that kind of thing. And she could run in boys' races because she was just a badass girl. Like there was no limit on that. But like the women's category was not open. So if I wanted to run in a women's race because I bet Lisette I could beat her by 30 seconds, like that just wouldn't happen. Yeah. So you can have an open
I think you
men's
probably.
Why not just not have
I think it sounds good.
Best, and then you have one section that those would be the only women.
As Donald Trump would say, sounds good, doesn't work. Look, I think everybody knows that if you're getting assaulted and you call a cop, you want two big burly dudes to show up. I don't think we ought to be socially experimenting. Are there some one out of a million women who might be able to, pound, some terrorist's face in? Sure, maybe there is, and maybe some meritocratic standard would allow for that to happen if it's
that's
pretty
not where
high.
It ends. That's not where it ends, right? The second
it doesn't
one
end
gets
that
in,
way. Yeah,
some congresswoman gets in and says we've got to have this
exactly.
many.
It's like Nancy Mace and the what was it? Not the name of the school.
I think that there's so many practical issues with this, like coming at it from
Men
the lawyer's
need
side.
male
Like, would you want
spaces
all
that are
male
divorced. No,
rape
Wilfred.
and SVU detectives? Like there obviously are a lot of issues you'd have to handle.
We need to segregate men and women in certain places. And we need to keep, and I think it's actually, I'm extremely convinced that we actually need to create more male spaces to exclude women from. I think that the problem is that women are too included in our society in certain places.
Man, why did we start here? This is good stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. No, actually, we're going to stop in like 3 minutes.
I think women are too pervasive in our society. We hear too much about their opinions. We have too much of their participation in our sports. We have too much participation in education. I think that probably we need more boys and girls schools where they're separated. I'm not saying that you get rid of co-ed schools, but I think that the problem of society is that we are too integrated and that men aren't able to define who they are as men. And the only place that they can do that is to go to churches that might have programs that are male programs, but even those have been soy jacked out, a lot of them. So I actually think that we need more institutions that are exclusive to women, to men, and that exclude women from them. And we need to do that legally. We need to, and when I say it, I mean to write laws, but we need to repeal laws that have put women into golf clubs with men, required women to be in golf clubs. I think, I'm not saying that women shouldn't be able to golf, but that men should be able to have private clubs, and that should be able to be enforced by the law. So exclusion and segregation is a good thing. I think it's a good thing for men. I'm not talking about racial segregation. I'm talking about gender segregation is a good thing, because I think
this is an interesting topic. Now we're actually probably going to wrap this up. This is a fascinating conversation. We've been going for about an hour and a half. Good talk. We'd love to have you back. Now this actually, we are quite arguably should have started here with the sex and femininity debate, as I think Austin would have liked, and Charles.
And I can't wait till we cut that up and take off the piece at the end where you said, "I'm not talking race." And just put up a clip
Very
and say,
fine,
"I love segregation.
I'm talking
segregation forever."
Bunch of black guys in the background, but no, obviously we're not going to do that. I tend to agree with that. By the way, like my one last comment on that, like. I tend to agree there should be more spaces for men. I also think there should be more spaces for women. This is one of the biggest problem for a civil rights movement is after it basically wins. So like black civil rights, 1954, desegregation happens. Civil Rights Act, 1964. Once the law is equal, what do? Well, it turned out to be a bunch of pushes for affirmative action, so on down the line. Now there's a negative view of civil rights in the USA. Same thing with feminism. Once you have the core points, you can vote, marital rape, etc. Do you really need to integrate every tennis club in the country? We can debate that, but let's go around the circle and talk about our final takes from today. I usually start with the final takes, but I've done a lot of yapping this last 2 minutes. Charles or Brooks, you want to do a final take for a minute or two?
Oh, I can do one. I want to start with the segregation.
All right.
My final take is that there's another reason why that's important. We can talk. I didn't have enough time. We don't have enough time to talk about where I agree with Austin or not, about the legalities of it, how much we strip back. But I totally understand it. And there's another benefit that we're forgetting. Because one of your replies, Will, was that, yeah, I agree with that, but also I think we need more feminine spaces. My issue is all the spaces are female. You're forgetting that most of the households are single family households led by women. The average 9-year-old boy can go the whole day and never see a man, right? His teachers, because most male teachers are middle school and up through college, but not elementary. So his teachers are female. He's living at home with his mom and his sister. They're not going to church anymore. So even if the pastor's male, they're not going there. Daycare is female, and the soccer moms. So all he sees are girls. So there's plenty of female spaces. So I think that is one thing that boys and young men desperately need. I don't know if we need the law to get them there, but I think that's another ancillary benefit we could get from having no spaces.
Boom. All right, Brooks Crenshaw.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with that, Charles, and I think one thing that is largely missing is competent fathers, and that's been a growing problem for a couple of generations, and it takes a man to make a man. A woman cannot make a man. She makes boys. She nurtures boys. That's her role. She's a good nurturer. That she's wired that way. There are exceptions to that, but in general, women make boys and men make men because they teach men how to properly, what would you say, harness their aggression towards something useful for society. And without that, men have two choices. One is going to land them in prison, and the other one's going to make up an incel, a virgin incel, and that's where we are. I don't know about law with regard to spaces, but I do tend to agree with the sentiment that we need to reinvigorate the spirit of man in the country. And I think a part of that is the through line through most of these conversations, that I think the solution is to reconnect with our past. And I mean our deep past. We mentioned Camelot, which is plenty of years back, but we have a lot of inherited wisdom with regard to how to be, and a lot of story that has really rich narrative, metaphor, moral stories that really teach boys how to be men with the guidance of a father. And I really tend to think that going back to the pre-war and far beyond past to figure out how humans made it this far is where the solution lies. And politics is not that. It has to be upstream of politics. It has to be philosophy and culture, as Breitbart. Shout out Breitbart.
Right. Yeah, my own take on this, I think interesting. And this is one of those things where I'm kind of arguing with you guys, but I'm pretty sympathetic. Like, I don't think we need fewer male spaces in society or something. But I actually think there's a deeper issue here beyond men and women, and the issue is liberty. So we started off talking about libertarianism and kind of the increasing level of regulation in society. We don't have flying cars because there are multiple agencies that regulate what an aircraft is. I hadn't even thought about that for a couple of years. Similarly, it's a little bizarre that we're talking about the whole question of who can come to your private golf club. I mean, I suppose that I disapprove of the idea that you can have a golf club just for WASPs or upper class blacks or Jewish men or something, but all three of those used to be quite common. And I don't see anything necessarily inherently evil about that. That's who the doctors are around this particular neighborhood. You know, that is currently against the law. And there are dozens of laws like this, to the point where your war academy, which is privately chartered like the Citadel, which uses its own damn water from a deep bore well, cannot decide who can attend and train in war. So this is a core element of American society, that literally everything we do is regulated by these gigantic cephalopod-like governmental structures. And we forget this over and over again to our peril. So, I mean, a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about, well, how do you make society less feminized? I have some issues with this guy on virtually everything, but he wrote a good book about this, Dick Hanania, The Origins of Woke. I mean, he points out that there's this entire legal code that basically mandates that a lot of what you encounter is going to be very regulated, going to be very woke. So I think when serious people talk about how do you change society, you're talking to some extent about how do you change the law? How do you change the regulatory structure of the country? And I think that needs to come more to the fore. I mean, do we need more Caucasian and black male teachers? Yeah, sure. But I mean, also, like, should it be easier to homeschool your kid? Should it be easier to hire and fire teachers? Should it be easier to hire high IQ teachers? Teachers actually, and this is amazing to me, score lower on the basic board test than almost any other profession in the country. And that's been going on for about 30 years, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, there's a whole infrastructure behind why you can't just have a men's or a women's institution that we need to rip out by the roots. All right. Austin Peterson, our guest, loving it. What's your final word of wisdom?
You guys really, you've said everything that I wanted to say tonight, but I think, there's a sense of romance that's been lost. I think even men need to recapture the myths and the legends that made Western society. I think that we probably need to spend more time focusing on the classics. That, the Bible is a really great backbone of Western civilization, but we probably need to touch on Aristotle. We probably need to understand Stoicism. We probably need to touch our ancestors. And like you were saying earlier about Konstantin Kisin, talking about how most people know only about 2 generations before because those are the only humans that they've interacted with. We need to try and find ways to bring these stories to life. I think that there's a group that I highly recommend out there that's doing a good job at looking at history, and that's the Angel Media Group. They've got a new movie coming out called George, and it's about George Washington's life. So we need to tell the stories of our romantic heroes. Much of the problem, I think, with our society culturally is because we've allowed the left to tell our stories. They're telling the stories of our heroes, of the people who have defined our ideas. The ancestral lineage of our ideologies are being told by woke leftists because that's who's controlled the media for a long time. So I think it's important for us to recapture and be the storytellers, that we need to become the myth makers ourselves and to weave new legends. Because I think without the societal the stories that bind society together as the sort of mythical round table in such a way, things fall apart and you end up sleeping with the king's wife and society is destroyed. You destroy Camelot. So, hey guys, this was a really great conversation and I'm glad we could talk about things like sex. I don't get to talk about these kinds of things with other conservatives because, usually they got to stick up their butt. So thanks for coming on, letting me come on your show. And I hope that some of you guys will come on my show as well. We should do something like this on mine. But I hope that your followers will check me out at AP4Liberty. I've got a 5-day-a-week live news talk show. Wilfred's been on it. It's 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time, so it's an early show. So if you're getting up in the morning, getting your kids ready for school or whatever you're doing, and you want to stay informed and maybe have like a good laugh and hear some good interviews, people like Wilfred or like that's the quality, the quality level of my guests. So if you like Wilfred, you'd probably like the Wake Up America show. Check it out at rumble.com/AP4Liberty, and you guys all have a good night. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you for coming on. This has been Cut the Bull, Wilfred Reilly, Charles Love, Brooks Crenshaw, and today, Austin Peterson.
To say, Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.